am Erica Carroll, the Education and Training Manager here at Atlona, and with me today is our Sales Engineering Manager, Seth Powell. You want to say hi, Seth? Seth is muted at the moment. Maybe he'll unmute himself in just a second.
Hey guys, can you hear me, Erica?
Yep, I can hear you perfectly. Thanks, Seth. So we'll be hearing from Seth in just a few moments, but first I'd like to thank you all for joining us today as we continue to unravel another feature in this Velocity series, and today's focus is on custom control GUIs. Just to recap, Velocity is an IP-based control system that's comprised of a few very distinct components, but today I'll cover just two. First is the gateway, which comes as a hardware appliance or runs as VMware, allowing us to control up to 5,000 IP controllable devices. And second is the touch panel, or the user-facing control pad. Now, by default, Velocity creates a simple control interface like the one you see pictured here, but today's webinar is going to teach you another option which allows you to customize these pages. On the physical user interface side, there's a couple of options. We offer PoE touch panels available in 8-inch and 5.5-inch versions that can be mounted in either vertical or horizontal orientation. Also, if you want to provide your own device, there's a license option for BYOD devices to communicate with the gateway. Now, with this license option, apps are available for Android and iOS devices. Plus, as you'll see today, we also have the ability to call up a control using a web browser. So, brief introduction out of the way, I'm going to hand things over to Seth. So let me give him controls.
Thanks, Erica.
There we go.
All right. And Erica, let me know when you can see my screen there.
I can see your screen.
Cool. Okay. So again, guys, thanks so much for joining us. So I'd like to start with just kind of a super quick, brief rundown of what I've already got set up here in my Velocity Gateway to kind of give you an overview of kind of where we're going to start, right? So because we're covering specifically custom GUIs today, I have gone ahead and added a site, a building, a floor, and a room to our gateway here. So if I click on this, it's going to take me right into to this room that I've created called Custom GUI Demo. If I click on my Edit Room Technology button, it's going to open this room up, and you can kind of see what all I've added here. So for today's demo, I've added a UHD SW510W, which is our wireless presentation switch, an Apple TV as a source, a BYOD source, and this is just a generic laptop driver that I've named BYOD, but it's kind of a placeholder for any sort of BYOD, any sort of tablet or anything like that we might want to cast to the 510W wirelessly. And then I've added a laptop driver as well for a hardwired laptop, as well as a single display that we would be sending video to. So in terms of how I have all of this connected internally here, my input connections are basically HDMI 3 is my Apple TV, HDMI 4 is my hardwired laptop, and then of course I have my BYOD connection here on my BYOD. Down below that, in my output connections, I have the display connected to input HDMI 1 on that actual display. And as you guys, may or may not have seen, if you've seen this sort of introductory Velocity stuff, you'll know that when I set those things here in the SW510W, it will also save those things in these individual devices as well. And so what that means is that now the system knows exactly how to route signals. If I tell it route the Apple TV to the display, it knows that the Apple TV is on HDMI 3, and then it needs to, select input HDMI 3 on the SW510W in order for that to happen. So as part of the sort of standard Velocity setup as well, if you guys have seen this sort of basic Velocity demo before, you'll also know that this will also generate a custom not a custom user interface, a standard generated user interface that's going to look something like this, right? This is kind of what our basic generic user interface looks like It's going to give you a power on button, and it's going to give you a video button. Of course, you do have the ability to sort of manipulate these things, to change backgrounds and things like that as part of the standard user interface. If I hit my room on button, after the room starts, you see I have these source selection buttons. I have this display. If there were multiple displays, it would show those down here as well. And it's simply drag and drop, right, to switch my video. If there is a remote control available for a given device, like the Apple TV, for example, that comes as a fly-in here and gives me the ability to control that Apple TV. And I can change all of that, if I dive deeper into the menus. But what we're going to be doing today is we want to take this user interface and we want to generate a custom user interface that effectively has the same properties and does the same things that this does, right? So if I go back over here to my modify room page, you'll notice this button in the top right here that when I hover over it, it says custom pages, right? So we're going to go straight into our custom pages. And as you can see, I've kind of done a little bit of work on this already. What I've actually done so far, just to kind of make sure that you guys understand, is if I click this background button here, it allows me to add an image to the background. So this whole thing that you see here, this is just a background that we've created in Photoshop with a nice Atlona logo and kind of like some delineated spaces here that we can put buttons to make it look, kind of nice. This could really be whatever you want it to be. Now, if I don't place an actual background on here, it's just going to use the same background that I've got here, which for now I just have selected as flat black. But this could be whatever you want, right? You can also make it, a faded color of some sort. You can make it an image. You can make it whatever you really want it to be, and that's going to copy over to the custom GUI pages as well, unless you wanted to add a background image. So I've added a background image. As you can see, I've also added a couple of buttons here, right? But if you remember, there are three sources. We have our Apple TV, we have a laptop, and then we have a BYOD source as well. So I'm going to be adding another button and kind of walking you through how I'm going to create these buttons and how I'm going to get some like press actions on these buttons. And then we want to make these buttons, do my switching as well. We want to make sure that when I press these buttons, that it does actually make the switch on the SW510W just as it would previously. And then lastly, what I want to do as well, because this is kind of my, this is kind of my secondary page, right? What we want is we want a start page as well, where, maybe we have just the Atlona logo and we push to start the whole system, right? So let's go ahead and start with that. So I'm going to click my pages button right here. And as you can see, I'm currently on a page that I've called home screen. This is where my sort of video routing is going to happen. And I actually need to move this, go to webinar panel so I can see my plus button. So if I hit this little plus button right here, it adds a new screen. And I can add as many of these screens as I want to, right? I can add as many of these different pages as I want to and flip between them for different various functions. We're not going to really focus too much on that today. But this page I'm going to call start page. All right, so this is my custom start page. And again, what it does is it automatically just takes the background that we've given the standard GUI pages. So again, flat black here. What I want to do is I just want to add basically an image, but in this particular case, I want to have the ability to size my image as well. So the way I'm going to do that, and I apologize, this is a bit of a little bit of a funky way to do this. I could have just created a background and used a picture background, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a button, and I'm just going to add this image as the image for the actual button here. So I'm going to go to upload new, and I'm going to call this Atlona logo, and we'll upload. And most likely you guys can't see this part. I've just got a file browser open and I'm just adding the Atlona logo in here. All right, and so I've added this Atlona logo, and it actually says Atlona by Panduit, but it's all white text, so you can't really see that there. That's fine. And I'm going to click Create Referenced Image. So then I'm going to go in here, Uploaded Images, Atlona logo, and there's my Atlona logo. The other thing I want to do is, since this is a button that I created, I want to take away that border so that doesn't look too strange. And then I can kind of resize this so that it actually looks appropriate, the correct aspect, something like that, right? Okay, so the next thing, so I just kind of want that in the middle of the page. And by the way, there are grid lines if we really want to get precise with it. Not too worried about that right now since this is just a demo. The next thing I want to do is I want to put a just a label on here. I want to put a little text down here at the bottom, and I want this text to say touch anywhere to start. And we'll just make this center and middle aligned, and maybe make that a little bit bigger as well. All right. Okay, so just add that text there. So the next thing that I want to do, so now, we have this, which is a button, but I really want, I put the text touch anywhere to start. I really want the customer to just be able to walk up and just tap the touch screen anywhere. So we're not going to utilize this as our actual button that's going to do our page flip. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another button, and this button I'm actually going to make the size of the entire screen. So make this button the size of the whole screen. And again, I'll go into my properties here, and I'm going to get rid of the border because I don't want that to show. So now I essentially have a transparent button that's overlays the entire screen. And all I want to do is I want to tell this to basically navigate to a specific page. So when I create this button and go into the properties on this button, I have this navigation section here. So if I drop this down, it's going to give me several pages that you notice here say system, right? So these are pages that are auto-generated whenever you first create that specific room. These are auto-generated by Velocity. And then down here, the ones that don't say system, these are the ones that I've created, right? So when I press this, I want this to navigate me to the home screen, which is going to be our main screen, right? So page navigation, home screen. So basically that just says flip the page to the home screen whenever I click this. Okay. So at this point, my start page is done, right? So that's going to be my start page right there. Now let's bounce back over to my home screen, right? And I'm going to do two things now. I'm going to add another button for my BYOD, and that way I can kind of show you guys what I've done here with these buttons, how I built out these buttons, how we kind of make these buttons flip and turn orange when we press them, and so on and so forth. And then I'm also going to add a volume slider up here at the top for our sort of main volume. Again, let's go ahead and add another button. So I'm going to click Add Button. And I think I left these, I left these the same size. As you can see, this will also snap to a grid, which is nice because I can snap this to exactly the location that these other buttons are aligned on the left here. I'm gonna just kind of eyeball it, and I think I've got it pretty close there as far as spacing vertically. And then I'll double click this. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to add an icon here. Now, there's a ton of icons, of standard icons that you can utilize, as you can see here. I'm going to use this cast icon because essentially this is going to be our wireless BYOD. This is going to be our casting capability. So I'm going to use this icon here. Again, there are tons and tons of these that we have the ability to use. And as you saw earlier, you can upload your own as well. So I'm going to choose cast here. And then I'm also going to choose for the fill color, to make it the same as the rest of them. I think I did 383838, I think is what I did for hex value. It's just kind of a dark gray color. Yep, that's right. So I've created my button, right? And I have this button the same as these other two. But what this is not going to do yet is right now I haven't added any sort of conditions to this button to say when I press this, turn orange, right? And I want to make sure that this does this. Now, these other two buttons are doing this. So let me kind of get into a little bit of how I've done this. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we are going to do another webinar in, I believe, a month or something. I'm sure Erica will tell you guys all about that at the end of this, but we're going to do another webinar that's going to do more of a deep dive on variables and conditional logic and some of that stuff. So I'm not going to dive too heavy into this, but I want to at least show you guys what I've got going on here. So this tools button right here allows me to create global variables within Velocity. As you can see, I've already created 3 variables, one for Apple TV, one for BYOD, and one for laptop. And I've given those a default value of 0, with the intention of this basically just being a binary integer. It's either a 1 or a 0, right? And all that's doing is it's telling me essentially the status of this button, whether or not this button is currently selected or whether it's not currently selected. And depending on whether it's currently selected or not currently selected, that's going to determine the color of the actual button. Right? So the first thing that I want to actually do to set this up is I want to actually create a macro on this button that is going to toggle that variable for me, right? So in order to do that, I go to Device and Velocity, and then my command is going to be if else logic, and as you can see, it says toggle out in parentheses there. And we're going to say if BYOD, which is my variable, equals 0, then we're going to set that variable to 1. Otherwise, we're going to set that variable to 0. So literally all that means is when I press this button, it's going to run through this logic. And if that button is currently selected, it's going to turn it off. If that button is currently off, it's going to turn it on, right? So that's my logic, simple as that. The last thing that I need to do to kind of make this work now, to actually make this change colors, is down here at the bottom, I have this conditions section. So I'm gonna add a new condition. And I'm gonna say, if my variable BYOD equals 1, then I want, and font color is actually what changes the little white part of the logo there, which is really what I want to change. So I want to say change this to this orange color, and I believe let me try to remember. Actually, hold on. Don't exactly remember the color, so let me go back to here and remember what the value is.
F5F00.
There you go. Thank you. All right. So we're going to change this to FF5F00, right, which is my orange color. So if BYOD variable equals 1, then we want to change this font color to orange, right? We don't need to put a condition for the 0, right? Because 0 is its default, and its default fill is going to be this white font color and this gray fill color. So we don't need to put another condition on there. This should work. Now, the last thing that I really, well, actually, first of all, I want to go ahead and get rid of this border because none of the other ones have border. So the last thing that I really want to do here is, now that I've set that up, what's going to happen is I could now theoretically select this button, right? And it would light up orange. But then I go to select my Apple TV button and it lights up orange, but it doesn't necessarily turn this button off, right? So what you'll notice that I've done is I've also called in these other buttons, I've also called on my if Apple TV equals 0 logic here, I've run this macro titled Apple TV selected, right? So if I back out of this really quick here to just show you guys the macros that I've created some selected macros down here, Apple TV selected, laptop selected, and BYOD selected. So what this actually does is it just does two things. It just sets the other variables back to 0, right? So it just says, it basically makes these buttons mutually exclusive, right? When one of them is selected, the other two are deselected, right? And I've done this for all 3 of these buttons already, so that we didn't have to, kind of sit here and go through all this. But as you can see, I have my BYOD selected here, which is going to set Apple TV to 0, and it's going to set laptop to 0. So I want to run that BYOD selected macro as part of my button here. So going back in, if BYOD equals 0, then run macro BYOD selected and set variable to 1. So now all of my buttons should technically be mutually exclusive from one another, and when I press these buttons, they should highlight orange and turn the other two back to their default colors. So let's test that out. Now, if I were to press launch control, it's going to try to launch the standard control page because I haven't gone in yet and told the system, hey, I'm using my custom GUI, I'm not using the default GUI. So I want to back out again, and I want to go back into my room control options and then my user interface options. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to disable this home page because I've got my own home page. And my start page is going to be the actual start page here. And I don't really have to do anything else because I've already told this start page when I press that button, it's going to take me into this home page, right? So that should be good. So I'm going to save that. And then if I press this button to launch my control, I have my control page. So touch anywhere to start. And then it brings me to this page. And as I press these buttons, I have to go in and take a look at that really quick. 1 second. Maybe I broke that one. Laptop selected. Oh, you know what? I think it's because yesterday when I was building this, I actually had navigation set up on these pages, and because I had some more things going on that I had deleted. So let's kind of make sure this navigation is cleared out. It's technically not. I'm just going to set that to home screen so that it's not doing anything funky on me. And let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, that's working. So I have my buttons. As I click on them, they highlight. It turns the other buttons off. That's great. So 2 more things that I want to do. Number 1, I want to make sure that whenever I'm pressing these buttons, it is actually making the necessary routes on the 510W, right? So right now, all I've really done is created a little, maybe a more aesthetically pleasing user interface, but it's not actually doing anything yet. It's not actually doing my control, so I want to do that aspect of it. But then I also just want to add a volume bar up here on the top, right? Just to kind of illustrate some other controls that we have the ability to add. So I'm going to go back here. Let me exit out these auxiliary pages I have open here. Going back to my macros, you may have noticed when I was in here a minute ago that I had 3 other macros, and those are Apple TV, laptop, and BYOD. And these macros essentially are just making my route for me. It just says device SW510W, command is input switch to output, and my input is going to be HDMI 3 for Apple TV. Same thing for the laptop, except it's going to be HDMI 4, and same thing for BYOD, except it's going to be the BYOD input. So all that's doing is making my route for me. So that's pretty simple. All I really need to do then is add this as another command in my button press macro. So if I go back in here, on each one of these, I want to add another command, and it's already, this one, looks like I already created another command, but I'm going to go to device velocity, and I'm just going to say run macro, and we are going to run the Apple TV macro, which is going to make my Apple TV switch. Then we'll go into this one and run my laptop macro. Oops. So velocity, run macro, laptop. And then on this one, I want to run my BYOD macro. All right. So now that I've done that, every single time I press these buttons, it's also going to fire that macro, which will make the necessary route on the SW510W. So the routing portion of this is now completed. And the last thing that I really wanted to do is I wanted to add a DSP gain. So by default, I get something like this, right? And again, just like everything else, I have the ability to, make this bigger, make this smaller. I want to make that, kind of significantly bigger. And I don't like that it says audio gain. So let's just kill that. Well, I don't know, volume's nice. Master volume, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, that's fine. Let's center that. And so then we'll put this up here. Maybe right there, something like that. Okay. So, theoretically now we would go in here and we would actually assign an audio device, right? I'm just, obviously the only thing I've really added in here is the SW510W. This could theoretically be a DSP. You could go in and assign this a master control from a DSP. You could create a page that has mini volume sliders on it, like an audio page, where you can assign, microphone gains and output gains and all the audio controls that you could possibly want into some sort of an audio page. You may have actually noticed over here when I went to controls that we have a DSP gain, which is this horizontal DSP gain, and we also have a DSP gain vert, which is a vertical DSP gain that you have the ability to add if you'd rather see a vertical gain, like maybe if I wanted to put my volume over here and then I wanted to have my inputs across the top or something like that, I do have the ability to do that as well. So now that that's done, I want to take a look at this again, see how this looks. So I have my start page, touch anywhere to start, and then it takes me into my page here. I have my master volume here, and I have my input commands that are going to change the input on my SW510W. And then, technically speaking, this middle section, this is where I could put my individual controls for my Apple TV. I'm not going to have controls for my laptop or my BYOD, but I could put my sort of auxiliary controls for these sources, or maybe display controls or something like that over here in the middle. For time reasons, I think this is kind of about what we wanted to show for the day. Erica, I don't know if you wanted to kind of give a brief intro to what we're going to cover next time.
Sure. So you've already covered some of it. So next time we'll be talking about those variables more in depth, how to create them, why to create them, how they change and how they affect the system, how to set the system to change those variables to create other things to happen. So that's really the meat and potatoes that comes behind these custom control GUIs and making it available to do whatever you want it to do. This was a great presentation. I actually have a couple of questions here from some folks. Now, if you don't mind, can you go back into a button and then down at the bottom, the variable state? There's a question here that says, can you upload button graphics that already show state, like one that is red for off and another that shows green when on? So I would do this in conditions and change the image. Yep. But Seth, do you have a different way to do that?
No, that's exactly right. So what you would do is you would upload both, right? And the default image here would be, let's say, for example, red. And then the sort of toggle state would be down here in your condition. And it would be the same thing as this, except this font, instead of changing this font color, it would be Apple TV equals 1, and then you would change your default icon here. So your default icon would now be I can't remember if I said green or red the first time, but the opposite, right? So that whenever that button state changes, it actually changes the physical image instead of, the actual color of the vector image that we have here or whatever, right? So you're right. That would be the way to do it.
Perfect. So I do have sort of a general velocity question. Can velocity be set up to control an Extron 16 by 16 video matrix switcher?
Yeah, so definitely great question. So I have a pretty extensive knowledge of Extron gear. Their SIS commands are pretty straightforward. Most of their APIs are available to anyone who would be a direct Extron dealer. So there's kind of a handful of ways we could go about doing this. Number one, if this isn't a device that we already have in our device driver list, which I don't believe that we have any Extron 16 by 16, like for example, their XTP in there right now, what you could do is, number one, you could submit a driver request. So if we go back here, and you can find this on our website, by the way, if I go to add technology, there's a little button here that says request driver. You can access this directly from our website. You don't have to be in an actual gateway. You can request a driver from our software development team and just tell them that you're looking for a driver for that 16 by 16. But the other way that you could do it is you could actually go in and just build a driver with custom commands, right? We have the ability to build matrix drivers. So for example, if your syntax of your command is input AV output, carriage return or something like that, then you would specify a variable of input, you would specify a variable of output, and then you would tell it how many inputs and outputs are available. 16 by 16, so there's 16 inputs, there are 16 outputs, but it knows that the syntax of this command is input number, AV, output number, carriage return. And so now what's going to happen is when you come into velocity, when you go to place that command somewhere, whoops, I think I actually did click on the driver request form. When you go to place that driver request, it's going to, or when you go to place that driver somewhere, on like a button press, for example, it's going to give you a drop-down menu. What input are you selecting? What output are you selecting? Okay, now it knows. Okay, let's say we're doing input 5 to output 7. So you drop down, you select 5 on the input, you drop down, you select 7 on the output, and now it knows it's sending 5 AV 7 %0D or whatever, right? So yes, we would be able to control that. There's sort of a handful of ways you could go about doing that, but suffice it to say, it would be simple enough to get something like that done, yes.
Awesome, thank you. And there is a video for what you've just described, creating a matrix driver, available in Atlona Academy if you need to go watch that. So somebody's asking, is there an online login so we can play with Velocity on the cloud? I'm going to go ahead and say no. That actually requires a Velocity Cloud license. If you'd like to demo Velocity, we can reach out to your local regional sales manager and get you one of those. Or you can also join us for any of our factory trainings where we have hands-on time with our Velocity control system. Somebody else is asking, do you have a set of predefined macros we can access and reuse? This is great feedback. Seth, do you want to talk about that?
Predefined macros. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about that. We don't. That is great feedback. I like that idea. Certainly we take this kind of feedback, in mind. We take this directly to our product management team, and they'll kind of decide what they want to do with that. But that is a great idea. Currently, we don't have real predefined macros. What we do have, I guess, kind of similar. We have something called event macros, and the way I generally refer to event macros are, these are macros that happen on a trigger that's internal to Velocity. And what I mean by that is, when I click on this, if I create an event macro, it gives me a finite selection of things that I can use to trigger a specific macro. As you can see, room on is one of these, right? So this is kind of what you're talking about, I suppose. But again, you're still creating the macro yourself. It just gives you this predefined sort of trigger point, right? So this room on means that when someone presses that room on button that you saw at the very beginning, then it's going to trigger this macro, right? And it will do whatever commands I put in this macro. If I put 50 commands, power all of my gear on, drop a projector screen, set a specific input on a switcher, it will run through all of those commands and run those macros. So, outside of that, there's not really, specific macros. I guess the only other thing that maybe is similar would be, if I can remember where it's at. It's not, I don't think it's in user interface. There is a default room on macro that will power specific things on, and there's a selection in here somewhere.
It was in the last page. Oh, there you go.
Excluded on-off devices. So if I have like a lot of displays, for example, it will power those on and off automatically on the room on button. As you can see here, there's a place where you can exclude that. This is not checked. So currently that LG TV that I've added to my system would actually theoretically power on and off by default when I press that room on or that room off button without me setting up any sort of room on macros. So that, there's that. But outside of that, it doesn't really get too much more advanced. But I do like your idea of having, more sort of predefined macros in a list that you could maybe just drop down and choose from to make things a little simpler. So we'll definitely take that feedback.
Yep. So is it possible to store the settings as a file for backup or device replacement? I believe this is maybe on a room level.
Yeah.
It could be on a system level.
So actually, pretty much at every single level in this hierarchy, you do have the ability to, export these devices, and it will export it as a .json file. So for example, if I export this, you'll see down here, and hopefully you guys can still see this little tab at the bottom, but it says, room custom GUI demo .json. So this is a room file now. And if I wanted to, whenever I go to add a new room, it says, okay, do I want to add via form, which is basically add a new room, or do I want to import and upload? And here's where I would import this room that I just downloaded to, let's say a different gateway, for example. I do have the ability to do that. And again, I can do that at pretty much every level, right? If I go back to the building level, or even if I go back to the site level, I have the ability to export this site completely to push this whole site to another gateway if I wanted to. If this was a site that I was installing pretty regularly, at a bunch of my clients, I could just put this on a thumb drive and start from this one default starting place every single time, which would maybe save a decent amount of time.
Cool. So a couple more questions. When you're creating a touch panel, do you have to repeat the design to adapt it to different touch panel sizes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Yes, I mean, if you want it to adapt perfectly, yes, you would have to. And you may have seen, one second. You may have seen here in my custom pages that I have this whole screen section, right? So I can actually turn on various screen sizes, but again, you would have to effectively, kind of redesign your screens for these various screen sizes to make this look correct. Now, it will, as you saw, and this is this one that I'm designing for right now is for a VTP 8-inch. Which is our 8-inch panel with a resolution of 962 by 601. You clearly saw that I did this in a browser and it just sort of like, scaled this for me, right? It doesn't look bad per se. It just has bars on the side. So it kind of just depends on, aesthetically what you're looking for. But yeah, if you wanted to make it perfect, yeah, the idea is you would go in and you would assign, multiple pages and develop for each type of environment that this may be found in.
Sure. So is there a maximum number of pages or devices within the design?
Devices devices depend on what type of gateway license you have. So currently I'm utilizing our only hardware gateway that we have, and that's our VGW 250. And the 250 at the end actually stands for the number of concurrent IP addresses that I can control at once, right? So it's 250 devices concurrently. Theoretically, we have soft licenses that would go all the way up to 5,000 IP controllable devices, right? So it's a whole lot of devices. You know, my thought would be initially that there you have a pretty hard time maxing out 5,000 IP controllable devices. Now, what was the second part of that question, Erica? I feel like there was a second part that I'm.
Yeah, a maximum number of pages.
Yes. So maximum number of pages. I can tell you that I've done some relatively complex custom GUIs, things like four-way divisible rooms and stuff of that nature that required a lot of pages. I'm talking, you know, maybe like 20 plus, like in the grand scheme of things, kind of flipping through the different control pages and for each scenario, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't hit that limit. You know, I can't imagine a scenario where you need, you know, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And at that point, we're talking about a little bit of a nightmare to try to manage. However, you know, I haven't personally hit that limitation yet. So off the top of my head, I don't know what that would be, but I haven't really had any troubles with it. You know, if you have an idea in mind or you know, a number in mind in which you think you may need for a specific project you're utilizing, I'd certainly be willing to sort of explore that more with our engineering team and see if they know what that actual hard limit is. But off the top of my head, I'm not positive.
Okay, and in the same building, on the same network, in different rooms, on different floors, should separate VGW 250s be installed, or is it better to operate with one for both rooms?
So there's not really a better practice there. In my mind, in my mind, it would really depend on how you have your network set up, right? Technically speaking, you know, the gateway is like a network appliance, right? There are ways that if you have, you know, your network sectioned off in floors, or you know, maybe you have like VLANs for different floors, like, you know, maybe it becomes just more of a drag on your IT team to have to manage passing that, you know, gateway traffic or that control traffic across multiple VLANs. In that instance, like if it's easier and it works out for the budget, sure, put, you know, a gateway on every floor. Or, you know, we've had plenty of projects where people were just specing control for a single room. And that's kind of the great thing about you know, about Atlona's control system is we're really not breaking the bank, you know. So there have been plenty of systems where people have used this for a single room, and that's perfectly fine. It's still a, you know, a very reasonably priced control system solution, even for a single room. But to answer your question, there's not a best practice. You could really do it however you wanted to do it. This could control an entire college campus across multiple buildings, or it can control a single room. It's just kind of up to how you want to use it and how your network's going to be set up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a question here about asking, can I change the navigation bar's layout? In this case, we have a left bar and an upper bar. Could we make a custom layout? And I believe this is in reference probably to that background image. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, as I mentioned before, this is actually just a background image, right? This was a background image that Erica actually put together in Photoshop. You could have whatever background image you wanted, right? So yes, these bars could be completely gone. They could be top and bottom, they could be left and right, they could be all four sides, right? If you had enough buttons and wanted to put something on all four sides, they could literally be wherever you wanted them to be, because it's just simply an image that we created in Photoshop and put as the background of this panel. So yes, it can be pretty much whatever you want it to be.
Let's see, can you use the velocity system if it's not connected to a network? And can you program the system if it's not connected to the outside, like in a DoD area?
Yeah, absolutely. So velocity is really, so if you look at the actual, and I can pull this up. if you look at the actual VGW250, I'm going to pull the web page up here so that you can see it. The VGW250, oh, that's the VSG, that's the soft gateway. Whoops. VGW250. The actual physical processor has 2 Ethernet ports on the back of it, as you can see here. Ethernet 1, Ethernet 2, and that is specifically for a scenario where you know, maybe you want to put your device on the internal network to connect it to your web so that it can pull firmware updates and things of that nature, or so that you can, you know, connect to it remotely via our Velocity Cloud software. And maybe you don't want to do that, right? Otherwise, you know, we basically have one connection for the wide area network, one connection for the local area network. Certainly, you can configure and manage and program Velocity without any sort of connection to a wide area network. Now, obviously, this is going to have to sit on a, you know, on a switch, and you're going to have to, you know, utilize the switch to connect to other devices to actually control it. But if that's just an AV LAN that's isolated from the wide area network or isolated from the corporate LAN, yes, absolutely, this would still work, no problem. This does not need a connection to the internet. You can go in and manually update firmware. You could just, you know, download firmwares to a thumb drive and, you know, walk in with a computer and connect with a computer and push firmware that way. Absolutely does not have to be connected to the outer world, if you
will. Great. So there's a question here. Is there a way to create a repeating command so that the system shuts down every night at a certain time if that user forgot to shut it down? And earlier we talked about event macros, and I do know that there is an event macro that says schedule at a certain time to run a macro. Can you show what that looks like real quick?
Yeah, hold on one second. So we go back in here, we go to event macros and scheduling. So there you go, right? So we would essentially say, you know, schedule this to happen daily, weekly, whenever, at a specific time, right? Set to 10 a.m., sure, that's fine. And then we would say, you know, do X, Y, Z, right? You know, this could simply be run a macro, right? So when we do this, run a macro, or you could just build the actual macro right here. However you wanted to do it. But yes, absolutely, that can be done.
Okay, and last question, can we program a drag and drop interface? As in, can we drag a source onto a volume slider to have the audio from that device play?
So I've gotten that question before. I've sort of thought through it. Thus far, I haven't been able to really come up with a creative way to set that up in Velocity. So right now, I want to say probably not. That may be something that we could develop in the future. For now, it would be a much safer bet to do something like, you know, maybe you have a small little button at the top of your screen that just says audio select or something like that, and you click it and it gives you a little, you know, a little window that gives you your audio sources, and you choose an audio source or something. But yeah, I can't really think of a creative way to do what you're talking about right now with dragging and dropping audio. That is a cool idea, maybe in a future update, but not right now.
Thank you for your time and all of the knowledge that you've given us today. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend coming up. Seth, you have any closing remarks?
Nope, you nailed it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you all. Bye-bye.